Hello and welcome back to Stop and Go F1 for this, our driver ratings for the Chinese Grand Prix. Remember to like and subscribe before we get into all of this, but if you haven't been here before, we're going to give each driver a score between 1 and 10 for their performances this weekend, although because it is a sprint weekend, we do it ever so slightly differently. We give them a score between 1 and 10 for the sprint, a separate score between 1 and 10 for the race, and then find an average of the two, with a bit more weight put towards the race than the sprint, and then that will be the score that they get for the overall weekend. So without further ado, let's get it going with Kevin Magnussen in the Haas. Now, an interesting one for Kevin. Had a good sprint race and a not so good main race. So in the sprint race, he went from qualifying 12th to finishing the race in 10th. So I gave him a 9 out of 10 for the sprint. Decent job there for Magnussen. Then in the main race, qualified 17th. Got involved in that incident with Tsunoda, that dive bomb that was never really going to happen. Finished the race in 16th with the 10-second time penalty. So I gave him a 4 for the main race, which works out as an average of 6 for Kevin Magnussen there. Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas actually did it the opposite way around. So in the sprint, he qualified 13th. He said he was impeded by Magnussen during the qualifying, which held him back a little bit there. But I don't know if he had damage or the setup was wrong or whatever happened to him in the sprint, but he just went backwards and ended up 19th, the last of all the drivers who actually finished the race. So it was a 3 out of 10 for Hülkenberg in the sprint, but in the main race, he really turned things round. So he qualified 9th, finished the race in 10th, bringing home another valuable point for the Haas team. So I gave him a 9 for the main race, which is an average of a 7 there for Nico Hülkenberg, and I forgot to change the image. Look, there he is. What a beautiful face. Anyway, here's Zhou. Zhou in the sprint had a fantastic sprint race. Qualified 10th, finished the race in 9th, just missed out on getting the points from P8 there, but I did give him a 10 out of 10 for that, because I thought in that car, that's a very good job. But if I could speak, that'd be good. Although I do think it goes to show that when they don't have to pit, the Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber cars actually can do quite well, because they had some good pace this weekend until they had to pit the car. So I gave him a 10 out of 10 for the sprint. Then in the main race, he started 16th, finished 14th. I gave him a 5 for that, because I thought it was about average for what he should do. But yeah, very special race for Zhou this weekend, his home race, and everyone seemed to love him there. And that nice little bit at the end was really good to see. So overall, though, an average of a 7 for Zhou Guanyu. His teammate, though, Valtteri Bottas, in the sprint, he qualified 9th and just kind of went backwards, really. He ended up being 12th. I gave him a 6 out of 10 for that. Then in the main race, he qualified 10th. Again, another great qualifying for Bottas in both qualifying sessions. Didn't finish the race, though. Engine failure for him. Although he was going pretty well at one point until the engine blew up. So I gave him a 6 for that as well. So an average of a 6 for Valtteri Bottas. Yuki Tsunoda now. And difficult one for Yuki. Yuki's first bad weekend in quite some time. So awful qualifyings all around for Yuki, qualifying 19th for both the sprint and the main race. Then in the in the sprint race, he ended up finishing 16th, so gained some positions, but really not what we come to expect from him there. So I gave him a 4 for that one. Then in the main race itself, a DNF after the contact with Magnussen, but again, just wasn't on the pace that we come to expect from him. I don't really know what was happening here. Apparently they changed the chassis over, so he's had the chassis that Daniel Ricciardo has had all year, and all of a sudden he started doing quite badly. So maybe the chassis is to be blamed here, I'm not too sure. But yeah, I give him a 4 for both races, so it is a 4 overall. Let's talk about Ricciardo, though. A better weekend for Ricciardo. In the sprint, qualified 14th, finished in 11th, so I gave him a 7 out of 10 for that. Then in the main race, he qualified 12th. He was doing very well up in the points, just behind Oscar Piastri, when Lance Stroll decided to drive into the back of him and just destroy his race. He was in a position that really should have brought home some points for the Racing Bills. So you can tell he was very upset about it as well. And apparently, well, not apparently, we all know the pressure that is on him and all the speculation that, he's going to lose his seat. And as soon as he's doing quite well, something completely out of his control ruins his race. So I felt very sorry for him. I gave him a 6 for the race, which is an average of a 6. Let's talk about Logan Sargent. Oh dear, another bad weekend for Sargent. So in the sprint he qualified last and he would end up finishing 18th, only beating Alonso who didn't finish and Nico Hulkenberg. So I gave him a 2 out of 10 for that. Then in the main race qualifies again dead last. And doesn't beat anyone. He finished 17th, beating the 3 people who didn't finish the race. Awful stuff from Logan Sargent, to be fair. Although at the start of the main race, he was in a relatively good position. I don't know if that was him overtaking or him not pitting, but it looked for a brief moment that he was going to do okay, and then it just didn't happen. He also got the penalty for the safety car infringement, which I thought was very unfair, realistically. Overall, though, I gave him a 2 in the sprint, a 3 in the main race, so a average of a 3 out of 10. Here's his teammate, Alex Albon, who it wasn't the best weekend for him either, really. Not his usual level. In the sprint race, he qualified 18th, finished the race in 17th, which is quite a bit off his usual pace. Gave him a 4 out of 10 for that one. Then in the main race, more back to normal. Qualified 14th, finished the race in 12th, so I gave him a 7, which is an average of a 6. Now, Esteban Ocon had a very good weekend. I think Esteban Ocon had a sneaky driver of the weekend because he actually was very, very good. This is Alpine's best weekend in quite some time. They brought a new lighter chassis along on Ocon's car this weekend, and it's looking like it's working quite well. In the sprint, he qualified 17th, but would finish eventually in 13th place, so a good drive from him there. I gave him an 8 out of 10 for that one. Then in the main race, he qualified 13th and finished 11th, so just a little bit off Alpine actually scoring points. And I gave him a 9 out of 10 for that. You may think that's a little bit high, but if you look at how god-awful Alpine have been, especially their race pace last time out in Japan, where the only driver they beat who on the track was Logan Sargent, and just because he went off to inspect some gravel traps near the end of the race. To go from that to nearly getting points in a matter of 2 weeks, I think Esteban Ocon did a fantastic job there. So an average of a 9 out of 10 for Esteban Ocon. Fantastic job. We'll have to wait and see how Alpine continue to improve. Hopefully this man will be getting the lighter chassis at some point as well. For the sprint, he qualified 16th, finished the race in 15th, so a pretty decent job for him. 6 out of 10 in that one. Then in the main race, he went from 15th to 13th, so a 7 out of 10 for him on that one. An average of a 7, but a good all-round weekend for the Alpine team, who are probably feeling a little bit more hopeful after this one than they were after Japan. Someone who's probably not feeling hopeful is Lance Stroll, who had a dreadful weekend yet again. So, in the sprint, he qualified 15th, whilst his teammate was on the second row. And then in the sprint race, he would eventually finish 14th, gaining 1 position on one of the fastest cars in a straight line on the track. I gave him a 1 out of 10 for the sprint. In the main race, he qualified 11th, whilst his teammate again was on the second row. He crashed into the back of Daniel Ricciardo, ruining not only his own race, but ruining the race of Daniel Ricciardo and Oscar Piastri, although he wasn't in a great position anyway, and then he moaned for a little bit, and then he finished the race in 15th. I gave him a 2, an average of a 2 out of 10. Now, I'm not one of those guys who likes to just hate on Lance Stroll because he's Lance Stroll, and if you watch this channel regularly, you'll know I've given praise to Lance Stroll when others haven't, but here was not a good weekend for him whatsoever. Let's talk about his teammate, Fernando Alonso. He's got a new contract in his back pocket, and apparently that's made him quite a bit quicker because he had a fantastic qualifying for the sprint, qualifying in 3rd. Then in the race, he didn't finish the race, but he did a fantastic job nonetheless. Realistically, he was the fight for 3rd place for all of the sprint race. Now, personally, the incident between him and Sainz, I thought was just a racing incident. No one to blame, and he was very unlucky to come away with that with a puncture. He would have been 5th or something, maybe a bit lower. and I thought he did a fantastic job nonetheless. I gave him an 8 for the sprint because he was fantastic. Then in the race, qualifies third yet again. I think Aston screwed him over a little bit with the strategy, making him go to the softs and then to the mediums at the end. Although I think he made it work. He wasn't as high as he could have possibly been if they'd had the correct strategy. But, you know, in the hands of another driver, Aston would have finished 12th in this race. And due to Fernando Alonso, they finished 7th and got some good points. So I gave him an 8 as well, giving him an average of an 8. Fantastic job from Fernando Alonso. Now, here's someone, Oscar Piastri, who I'm a little bit disappointed in this weekend, if I'm honest with you. He seemed massively off the pace in basically every single session. And it's the first time, I think, nearly ever, maybe I've done this once before, but I've come away from the weekend going, that was a bad one for Oscar Piastri, if I'm brutally honest. In the sprint, he qualified 8th and finished in 7th, so I gave him a 5 out of 10 for that one. But then in the main race, as his teammate is being like the best of the rest, he qualified 5th and finished 8th. He went backwards, although he did have damage from the Stroll incident there, but yeah, I gave him a 5 on both, so it is an average of a 5 out of 10 for Oscar Piastri. But we mentioned his teammate, here he is, Lando Norris. Great weekend for him. Well, mixed. So, sprint pole for the sprint race, but like we've seen Lando do a few times, my mind is cast back to Spain last year, when I think he qualified on the front row there. In a McLaren car that should not be on the front row at that time in the year. That was before all the upgrades came along. And then just threw it away. I think it was against Lewis again. Threw it away against Lewis Hamilton into the first corner. And here we are again. Lando Norris on the front row and just throws it away again into the first corner. You know, we talk about Lando and when will he get his first win all the time. And it's become a bit of a cliche now. And I think Sky Sports overdo it a little bit like they do with most things. But yeah, Lando here threw away good points to the team. We saw his pace all weekend was really good, and he should have been in the top 3 in this race, but he threw it away. He could have won it. I mean, if you look at the sprint race, Lando is definitely faster than Lewis, I feel, in that, but Lewis had the better control and basically forced Lando to make a mistake. At the start of the race, Verstappen has an issue and is slow. Realistically, Lando should have been able to maintain the lead and then build a gap whilst Verstappen had the issue at the start, to the point where when Verstappen's car has come alive, maybe Lando has a bit of a gap there, and, you know, Verstappen probably still would have won, but it would have been a lot harder for him if Lando hadn't allowed Hamilton to basically just bully him out of his position. So yeah, I gave him a 4 out of 10 for the sprint. Main race, though, a totally different thing. Qualifies 4th, finishes the race in 2nd place, really outdrove the car. This is the mad thing about Lando, is I think he's a fantastic driver. He's really good, but I do think he's just in his own head a little bit too much, especially about this whole race win thing. I think when he's in a position to win a race, I think maybe it's too much pressure for him. Whereas here, in this position, he knew he wasn't winning the race today, so he just drove as best as he could, and as best as he could got him 2nd place, and I gave him a 10 out of 10 for the main race because he was absolutely fantastic. Overall, it is an average of an 8 for Lando, but yeah, I don't know what's going on with Lando and winning at the minute. I think because it's become this whole thing that he hasn't won, that maybe it's a little bit too much pressure on him, which is a shame. But let's talk about Ferrari now, and Carlos Sainz. Not the best weekend for Sainz. It wasn't a bad weekend by any stretch of the imagination, but probably his worst weekend of the year so far that he's actually been driving at. But still relatively good. Sprint race, he qualified 5th and finished 5th. I gave him a 7 out of 10. And then for the main race, he qualified 7th and finished 5th. I gave him a 6 out of 10 for that one. So overall, it is a 6. But yeah, his driving against Alonso I thought was very good in the sprint. It was unfortunate what happened, but yet again, I thought that was a racing incident. Not the best for Sainz, but not the worst. He'll be moving on to bigger and better things pretty soon. Charles Leclerc as well qualified 7th in the sprint and finished the race in 4th, so a very good race for him in the sprint. I gave him an 8 out of 10 for that. Then in the main race, qualified 6th, finished again in 4th. I gave him a 7 out of 10 for that in the main race, so an average of a 7. Leclerc has not been on his qualifying pace recently. You know, I always say that he's the best qualifier on the grid, but the last 2 or 3 races, his qualifying pace has not been up to the high standards that he holds himself to, so hopefully that will be back when we come back in Miami. Here is George Russell, and what's he do this weekend? Not much. So, bad qualifying for him in the sprint leaves him 11th, but he does come back to pick up 1 point in P8, although he should have been quite a bit higher than that, especially when you look where his teammate was. I gave him a 4 out of 10 for the sprint. In the main race, though, he qualified 8th, finished in 6th. A pretty bang average race for him, if you ask me. But yeah, 7 out of 10 for him. Realistically, should have been beaten by Alonso, but Aston kind of handed the points to George there. A 6 out of 10 for George Russell. Lewis Hamilton now. What a race of 2 days for him. In the sprint, his best performance in years. In the race, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the sprint qualifies 2nd, finishes in 2nd. 10 out of 10 from me in the sprint. Fantastic from Lewis Hamilton. Then in the race, qualifies 18th. The only drivers he beat in qualifying was Yuki Tsunoda, who seems to have some sort of issue this weekend, and Logan Sargent, who's dreadful. And really, really quite bad qualifying for Lewis, who is a qualifying specialist, so really not great. He does come back to end up in P9, so getting a couple points there, but you'd expect him to be a hell of a lot better than what he was. And then, you know, at the start, he just didn't capitalise on the start of the race and the softs. I really don't know what happened with Lewis here. I know he said he made some kind of setup change between the sprint and the main race, but the lack of performance that car had, if you compare the 2 days, was night and day. Really, really weird stuff there. So I gave him a 3 for the main race. It was a dreadful performance from Lewis. An average, though, of a 5. Finally, let's talk about Red Bull and Sergio Perez. So in the sprint, qualifies 6th, finishes the race in 3rd. Gave him a 7 out of 10 for that one. In the main race, qualifies 2nd, finishes the race again though in 3rd. I gave him an 8. Pretty good weekend for Sergio, about what you'd expect. He continues to have some pretty decent results. You see, I say this all the time with Sergio though, but you know, the thing with Sergio is he starts well. It's the middle of the season where his performances kind of go away, so I am just kind of wait and see if that happens again. It's usually the European leg of the season, his results starts to waver a little bit, so we'll wait and see if that happens again. But so far, very good start to the season for Sergio Perez. And finally, only one man left to talk about, and that is Max Verstappen. So, sprint-wise, obviously he did win the sprint race, which was very good, but I was quite disappointed with his sprint qualifying position. He qualifies 4th, which, you know, is a bit off for Max Verstappen anyway at the minute, but, you know, it was a qualifying session in the rain. And, you know, Max is one of the best wet weather drivers we've ever seen, and his qualifying performances at the minute are fantastic. And he got beaten by Norris, Hamilton, and Alonso. So I was quite disappointed in his performances there, despite him eventually winning the race. So I ended up giving him an 8 out of 10 for the sprint, just because I thought that qualifying was not up to his usual standard. But, you know, in the main race, he qualified on pole, finished in 1st, led pretty much every lap apart from, like, 5 or 6 between his pit stop. So yeah, 10 out of 10 for the main race, giving him an average of a 9. So there you go. There are the driver ratings for the Chinese Grand Prix. Highest rated driver is Max Verstappen. Lowest rated is Lance Stroll with 2. So there you go. Let me know if you agree, if you disagree, in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Said that already. There'll be a video out on the channel on Friday. Not sure what it's going to be yet, but it'll be there. And then we'll have the news roundup video on Saturday. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time for all things sprint race yet again, this time in Miami. So I'll see you there. Until then, though, have a good one. Goodbye.